Going back to somewhat of the agenda, the topics, if you would, communication. Communication within our industry is such an important thing, but such a missed factor when it comes to a restoration company working with all the parties involved, meaning the property manager, the homeowner, the association board members, and then ultimately also then the insurance carrier adjusters. You know, end of day, 9 out of 10 times, restoration companies are going to be hired by a property manager on behalf of the building, a board on behalf of the building. Our client as a restoration company is somehow tied to the building. We are not hired typically by the insurance carrier. Yes, there's situations where we're assigned, but that's outside of this world. With that being said, the difference between a company going in, doing demolition, throwing in equipment, you have no idea, no matter what party you are in the process, of what's going on, and then all of a sudden you get a bill on your desk. You get that $13,000 bill on your desk of this is what it just cost me, this is what you have to pay us. The difference with us, and I wish more companies would do this, is the communication, because so many people get blindsided. It's knowing what's being done, why it's being done, and more importantly, making sure there's approvals along the way to do these things. Your typical restoration is probably covered by your insurance, but you may have scenarios where your client may want you to expedite drawing because of a certain scenario. You may have building constraints, different building materials that you didn't anticipate at the start of the project that you now find later on. And it's disclosing that to say, hey, you know what we thought was going to take this long is now going to take this long. It's also going to require this additional equipment. So you know why we're doing what we're doing. And then ultimately communicating that with the adjuster on the project as well, so that they know when they see an additional charge of, call it $3,000 for whatever, they know why we did what we did throughout that process. And it wasn't just, here you go, out the door we go, now pay our bill. Throughout the additional steps of restoration, first responders, some companies might try to market coming out and evaluating your building before the disaster. It sounds great in theory, but I really feel personally and from a company standpoint that there's no value to that as things change in your building. Staff changes, board changes. There may be construction going on around your building that could restrict access when that disaster does happen. So typical protocol for us would be you call in your disaster to us, whether it's the manager calling it in on your behalf, the insurance agent calling it on your behalf, or you calling us directly. There's someone coming out evaluating that situation right then and there. What's happening in present time with that loss? Am I sending out one van, worth of equipment, a truck, and 4 guys? Am I sending a semi and a bus full of guys? Things like that. These are all things that you may not realize until after the fact that why is there a semi out here? Things of that nature.
And to this point, I mean, it's very important to get the right restoration company in right away, because we get calls, a lot of times people will call us first, and our response is, well, you need to get a restoration company out there right away to mitigate any future damage that could happen if you don't get a restoration company out there immediately. And that will always be covered by the insurance policy, because if you do preventative measures, the intent is to limit the amount of damage, and that will be picked up by the insurance company.
Which insurance company?
The mitigation of the association's responsibility would be picked up by the association, and the mitigation of the unit owners would be picked up by the unit owners.
Our insurance company has already told us they don't have any say-so in this whatsoever.
And that's why we always recommend that everybody puts in claims, because it's much easier when they can determine who's going to pay it, because it's ultimately going to get paid. Rather than, one unit owner who sustained damage who didn't put it in, maybe they had 10% of the mitigation bill, and now you're looking and pointing and hoping that after they put it in 2 months down the line, that it's going to be covered. But, so that's why, it's paramount that everybody in the event of a claim that sustained damage puts in insurance claims to their appropriate parties.
And correct me if I'm wrong on this, you understand insurance language better than I. Isn't there something in there that states you have to take necessary steps?
Yeah, it's like reasonable. You have to act quickly. Now, but that's more or less reporting it to the carrier, as opposed to putting somebody out there, not getting it mitigated immediately. They just want to know, generally speaking.
And to touch on that too, it's well, it's ironic with Memorial Day weekend coming up. When we do a seminar here, where we actually do water restoration firsthand with flood property, so on and so forth. The difference between, let's say you have a loss on Friday, and it may disrupt your lifestyle a little bit by having a restoration company come in and set up drying equipment and core holes. It's a clean water source. It's something that's dryable. Nothing has to be removed and replaced. But you have family in town because it's the holiday weekend and you're having a big barbecue and you don't want this equipment here. Well, now you choose to wait, and now what was clean water over time, per industry standards, has become contaminated water because it's sat, it's picked up what was in the building surface, within the materials. So now you've went from a situation where you should have been and could have been able to dry what was wet to now having to remove and replace. And it's that wood floor in your kitchen that goes under your cabinets that has to be removed and replaced. So the cabinets have to come out, and now it's the granite on top of those top of those cabinets that I don't know if you ever tried to take out granite, it normally does not come out without breaking. So now from what to call it a simple, let's say $3,000 drying job that would have taken maybe 3 days at most and inconvenienced your weekend, has now turned into maybe a $15,000 replacing wood floors, refinishing the entire house because they're continual into your dining room and living room, and now putting new granite on top of the countertop cabinets you had to remove, and it's now a $15,000, $20,000 project, and it's taking a month. So time is important.
So I have a quick question. So from a personal perspective, here's my question. So my son was taking a bath, left the water on, and it started pouring down on this first floor, and I just let it dry. Am I going to have some issues?
What's the floor?
Well, it's wood.
Tile? It's wood in your
Well, no, the tiles in the bathroom and then wood on the first floor. If it comes pouring down the lights, it's not good. We stopped it, let's call it 5 minutes.
Oh, 5 minutes.
5 minutes, we okay? Do I have mildew growing in my spores in my? I'm just curious.
You may. It really depends on what's up there. Yeah, 100%.
You just scared me right there, so I had to chime in. I'm the insurance guy who didn't submit a claim.
You say that kind of comical, but I personally had a friend of mine who had he's in a 3-story kind of row home thing down in Roscoe Village. The roof drain backed up and it poured down and somehow came through into his master bath and then down into his mechanical room, or HVAC room if you would, which would be the second floor, the middle floor. So 3rd floor, top floor, middle floor. 1st floor was okay. And he was like, oh, it's fine. About 4 or 5 months later, he called me and said his ceiling is turning colors in his mechanical room. Why? And I'm like, well, it's wet. He's like, no, it's not. Did it ever get wet? He's like, oh yeah, it did. Had to tear out ceiling, found discoloration on the floor. Not to scare you, found discoloration on the floor, joists above that ceiling, and it turned into a pretty decent scope of work in order to mitigate it properly. Not saying that that's the case. It's also where the water went, what it picked up along the way, and where it sat.
I want to jump back to your son's problem.
It was a problem.
The gentleman whose apartment had the worst damage, who's still living in a hotel, will probably be in the hotel for a whole month because all the furniture has to go out. On about the 4th day, he was relaxing in the men's room, if you know what I mean.
I'm following.
All of a sudden, he hears something running. And he turns around. Now, his walls have been totally opened because they've been doing remediation. And he sees water running down the walls. So he gets up from where he's at, walks out to get his camera, his phone, to take pictures. And while he's taking pictures of the water running out of the walls, they start coming out of his pot lights in the ceiling. We figured, because nobody knows what went on, of course, that the young lady on the 2nd floor filled up the bathtub into the overflow pipe, and the overflow pipe is busted. That's the only way, because they went upstairs within an hour, and the floors were dry. So if the tub did overflow, or whatever overflowed, and there was only the daughter and the grandfather in the apartment, and he was sleeping. So the daughter would never clean it up. But we think it was the overflow pipe, and nobody admitted it. And it's really funny, you see these pictures and you see water cascading right down the lake.
Yeah.
Seems very-
I witnessed that firsthand.
Yeah,
It seems very plausible that it's so hard. We get in a position a lot where people are, well, where's the water come from? Sometimes you don't know, especially in multi-story buildings. Water will follow the path of least resistance, and if it's coming down, a wet wall at Chase, and then it picks up another pipe, you may have a leak or something broke, 4 floors up, 5 units over, and you're getting water down here, 5 floors down, 6 units over. And the source is actually over there because it's just following the plumbing of the building on the exterior of the plumbing.
happens all the time from roof leaks.
Very much so, yeah. You don't know where to pinpoint it to.
I think it's important nowadays too. There's a lot of foreclosures, it's calmed down, but I think if there's any empty units and you guys have a flood in a building, and you think a unit may be affected, you need to make sure you get in those units.
Well, there's a
And
problem.
take
You
care
see, when the bank forecloses on the building and they change the locks, we can't get in.
You provide notice, and if they're not letting you in, and there's, you're concerned about the other residents, you may have to put in your own lock. You may have to pull it out, get in there, and put in your own lock. Because we've had that happen. I had a unit owner who, she went into a nursing home. No one ever checked on her unit. They wouldn't give us a key. There was a sewage backup, and it actually affected 2 other neighbors, and it all started in her unit, and you have to get in that unit. So I think it's crucial if you do have something happen, especially a flood or a pipe break, that you get into the surrounding units and make sure that there's no damage, because the association will be held responsible for the drywall and the mitigation, and the longer it takes, and if mold develops, everyone has the fear of mold develops, or there's any other issues like that, you want to make sure you can get into every unit. So it's crucial to have the contact list of all your residents. I think it's very important also to ask for an emergency contact for all your residents, and make sure you have that documentation on file so you can contact their next of kin if they're not available. And you want to protect everybody in your association and get into every unit when needed.
Well, for the information of other people here, we take it one step further. We have a security room which has our camera equipment in it and our key lock system in it, what have you. We also have a key cabinet, and we have about 80% of the keys to all the units. It's on a volunteer basis. You can give it to us or not. You lose your key, why pay him $90 to break your lock and put another $100 into a lock? We'll unlock it for you.
Yeah, some of my associations have that as well. But like I
There's
said,
something for you all to
it's
consider.
voluntary. That's the thing, it's voluntary. And usually if a foreclosure or something happens, I ask the banks to give us another key just in case. A lot of them will volunteer to do it as long as you ask, because then they don't have to come out if there's a leak or something like that. They give us authorization to actually get into those units. But you do want to make sure that you look into that, and also to avoid working with restoration or insurance. If you know that there is a unit that's vacant, make sure that heat's getting turned on in that unit in the wintertime to avoid pipe bursts and stuff like that. You just want to make sure you're a little more proactive so you don't have to encounter any type of disaster.
I think I've taken up enough of your time. Let the other people speak.
And for what it's worth with frozen pipes, everyone thinks when it's really cold outside, we're really busy. A frozen broken pipe that's still frozen because it's cold is not a problem. So when it starts to thaw out and it gets a little warm out, that's when you have your issues. Just a lot of people don't realize that. It's the frozen, broken, thawed pipe that actually causes the damage.
I'm going to ask you a silly question, but
There's no silly question.
we learn from past mistakes, I hope. When I look at management, it's reaching the goals by getting priorities right, meet the deadlines, and also say keeping the system working while we have some dysfunctioning here and there. Now, having said that, what should be the conceptual framework in terms of being proactive, having excellent communication, channels, and also who is the coordinator? In other words, when a person, my wife says he's the manager, I understand that.
I said, isn't.
Oh, you have a question, okay. Because in some cases, I find that if there is a team spirit and everybody pitches in to improve what we have, or if you like to be more proactive, how can we offer incentives to some homeowners who are uninformed and uninvolved, and the board thinks that, please correct me, that the manager is God and can solve all problems, when we know that they have to have feedback and constant involvement. In other words, there should be a relationship that is interactive. We have, this problem, I'm not going to go into details, but I find that sometimes people have such a strong sense of insecurity that they sweep the problems under the carpet and they allow them to reach a crisis level, and then we have to manage crisis. So in this case here, what do we do to ensure that the system says alert, quote unquote, and we do the best to involve, say, the insurance and the management and our board and have a kind of coordinating way to help each other.
So are you talking about in a crisis, like if something were to happen, or are you just talking about getting residents more involved in the regular activities of an association?
I would say to have a way that we are prepared and not, the last minute find, okay, you call, say, Fred, or you call Tom, or you, or, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Dan. And that way, because sometimes, we can help each other by, each one being a specialist in his or her field and doing the best we can as fast as we can. I don't see that, I look at our case and I find that in some cases there is no such a thing as an emergency program, like you run to the clubhouse and you go through that door, and as soon as you look at that wall, here are the emergency phone numbers, you know who to call, and so on. I'm just giving a very simple example. So how do we help facilitate this kind of preemptive solution?
Sure. I mean, you could, some associations set up a committee to try and come up with an emergency plan.
Okay.
One of my associations, we all meet at the bottom of a cul-de-sac if there's an issue in a building. And then we also know that once we're there and we have someone that's sort of taken account of who's there, we then go into the clubhouse so people have warmth or they're cooled down in a situation where it could be very cold or very hot outside, if you have that ability. If not, you want to make sure that you have, at the end of the street, at the end of a certain area. You can also put that on your bulletin boards, just sort of a meeting point in case of an emergency. But there should be, as board members, I would at least have a board member with all the residents' phone numbers in every building. Depends how big the buildings are and stuff, or you can have committee members and have it divided up. So in case of emergency, like I said, I've been through a few, I've learned from that I have every single resident of all my properties in my iPhone. I just do. That's why it took a while to set it up, but now when someone moves out, I get that new contact information and I put that in my phone. And it's helpful because if a fire does occur and they have to have immediate evacuation, I can look on my iPhone and say who lives in this building, who's handicapped, I have all that information. And now you can store things so easily and just update it regularly. It takes a while to get it all inputted, but once you have that information, I think it's important to have that information available if needed. But committees are a good thing to set up if you can. I know it's hard to get participation because everyone's so busy. I mean, in a lot of my associations, you have three residents that show up at a board meeting. Hardly anyone shows up unless there's a big crisis. Then everybody shows up. So it is hard to seek that out. Sometimes associations will have, a community party or a block party once or twice a year. You could get to know each other and sort of solicit who you can get to volunteer on a committee. Maybe they don't want to be on a board because they don't like that responsibility. But hey, we're trying to come up with an idea for emergency situations. Do you want to join us? Some of my associations have just a neighborhood block party every year. We even invite the firemen. The kids love it. You invite the firemen, the policemen, they come out, they bring their trucks. It's a great free thing, and they love that neighborhood interaction. And then they get to know the board members, and they know the manager. I know at least 2 contacts at every single fire department in every town that I manage, because I want to establish a friendship with them, because guess what? If you need them, they're there for you, they know who you are. And I think that's crucial. And so, I would recommend that to all of you.
The reason I'm asking is that different people react differently under almost the same amount of stress. And we found that sometimes when we had the senior citizen, the first time we moved to our association, our subdivision, and she asked a very legitimate question, and she was really put down by a board member, and we thought that was totally inappropriate because she never came back. So if we have this kind of attitude, obviously it doesn't help when it comes to a disaster or a big problem, but we all should work together, how to get out as fast as possible. To give another example, and then we suggested to have the police department come and give us a talk about preventative action, and they said this is the rationale now, that we don't want to appear we have police or other problems. We wanted to make sure, sometimes you have those big signs, what do you call neighborhood watch. Yeah. And I'm not saying that we had to do that, to advertise, but what I was thinking is to take preventative action to the point that if it happens, at least we have an idea what to do.
I would just, if I may, from our perspective as the restoration company going in during these disasters, walk in, people, you're catching them at their worst time, especially if there's a fire, God forbid, hopefully no loss of life, loss of belongings. You know what a fire can do. You've seen it on the news. I wish every project we worked on was managed by a Janice. I really do. Because there are so many situations where, unfortunately, what you're saying is the norm. This is the minority, that's the majority out there, is the lack of communication, it's not my problem until it's in my unit, and then all of a sudden I want everything right now, and it's kind of, it feels like I'm not in a restoration managing disaster response. I feel like I'm in a psychology class now. But unfortunately, it's a huge issue, it really is, because when you have unit owners that are affected by something that they had absolutely no control over, they're aggravated, they're mad, and you can't help that, but human nature to be upset about something like that. Then to have financial responsibility on top of it. So my suggestion would be, as a board, as a property, find yourself a Janice to try to implement everything you want to get that cohesiveness and the community feel of the community that you would assume would be there, but it's really not.
And maybe putting a positive twist on having the officers come to a board meeting or a Saturday afternoon function, or you can a lot of times have your garbage company throw a little mini ice cream social, or things like that. You can have the police officers attend and just talk about just public safety in general, or how to make your home a safe place. I have the fire department come out around the holidays talking about holiday safety, Christmas trees, stuff like that. So kind of a positive twist on it and getting people out. One association had absolutely no attendance to anything, and we actually had Comcast come out and bring out the Easter Bunny to take pictures with their dogs or with their children or whatever, to put a little bit of a positive spin, and they had the police department there to talk to them about different issues as well. So I know it's so hard nowadays because everyone works different shifts and they're busy, and it's hard to get people to come out and to participate. But I think having some social activities, which really don't have to cost you much, especially if your manager, becomes friends with a vendor and you ask them to come out, it really does benefit.
Well, it's important to try to find the highest common ground, no matter how many different schedules or different type of people we have. And that's the whole idea. But anyway,
And from my end, obviously, I think for you, I think we're trying to figure out what's the best way we move forward in the event that something happens, so that as many people as possible are on the same page, right? So I think it's important in the event of a loss to have a restoration company like J.C. picked out. Just saying, nice plug there. Just know the restoration company you want to go to first and foremost, because that is your first call. The manager, the restoration company, we're going to put you in contact with the restoration company. Your manager's going to put you in contact with the restoration company. It's a common theme. From education perspective, for the unit owners on an insurance perspective, the path that everybody chooses to take is newsletter information, right? You send out a quarterly newsletter. the reality is how many people are reading that. And all you can do is try to manage your expectations of what the unit owners should know. I mean, if in a perfect world, you could document who has what, right? So in your case where you didn't or weren't able to get sewer backup, maybe one of your neighbors was, or what? Are you in a flood zone? Yeah, so maybe a neighbor.
High water table.
High water, but not a flood zone. Maybe a neighbor was able to get some sewer backup coverage through a different provider, and that would be a great resource for the unit owners to know who was able to get what through the the individual insurance marketplace. But I think it's important to document a couple times a year what the unit owners are responsible for from an insurance perspective, what the association is responsible for from an insurance perspective, so that everybody knows after the fact, hopefully, who's responsible for what. And it's as simple as, putting a few check boxes, a couple of boxes to check in the newsletter of, okay, this is your responsibility as a unit owner, your personal liability, your betterments and improvements to the unit, so if you've made upgrades, your personal property, those are your responsibilities no matter what. Can we get sewer backup? What other items can we address so that if there's a claim, hopefully it's going to be covered from all angles. And getting people to read that, I think, is probably the issue. Documenting who has what probably wouldn't be that simple. From a manager's perspective, I don't know if you have any ideas on how to do that, but that would be my recommendation, because information is very helpful, and knowing, the responsibilities after the fact is good to have it laid out, beforehand.
My question is a mold issue. And how fast does mold grow? We had a unit where an elderly citizen, she died, and the daughter, who had mental problems, wanted nothing to do with the unit because there had been a reverse mortgage, so she had more to pay than she could afford. So this unit sat vacant, and of course, because she didn't pay the utilities, everything was cut off. And that was the winter we had, the coldest winter, which was 2 years ago. The ceiling, obviously, pipes broke, the ceiling fell down, and the board did not do anything about going in there because they were sort of afraid because the bank had been taking it over but had not contacted. It was a mess. My question is, the people that live next door in this, it's a 6-unit townhome building, that mold just travels, doesn't it, through the rest of the drywall of the rest of the common walls?
It can.
I mean, does it usually or not?
This is one of those, there is no real definitive answer because the environment controls. Food is a living organism, mold is a living organism that needs food, it needs conditions to grow.
Okay.
So if you have wet building material, drywall, warmer temperatures, humid conditions, mold can grow and pollinate and move on fairly quickly. If you have a wall that gets wet today and then tomorrow you open it up and you find black and you say, well, this got wet yesterday and that's mold from that water loss, no, that does not happen. It takes, for it to start, it takes time. Will it spread, though, to neighboring units? It depends on the condition of those units. If you have an individual that lives in a neighboring unit that likes keeping their place really nice and warm and humid, chances are, yeah, because it's a perfect condition for it to live in. If that neighboring unit, though, likes their unit dry and cold, crisp air, probably not. Do they have some sort of active water leak near where that unit was affected in an adjoining wall? Possibly then, because now you have building material that could be touching and it could spread because it's wet. So there's a lot of factors, and I hope that didn't confuse it more.
Well, now they've gutted the whole unit, and they're going to strip it wall to wall. The insurance company is working with the bank investor. I guess it was sold, right? It was sold.
Yeah.
So.
You live in Morton Grove?
Pardon me?
You live in Morton Grove?
No, they
Because you're painting a picture of a project we're working on right now.
Oh, no,
Morton
no.
Grove. Never mind.
No.
But if a unit is owned by a bank when this occurs,
Yeah.
you try and make contact with the bank. If not, talk to your attorney, but you can open up that door and have that drywall removed and bill it back to the bank. When
Well,
the bank
that's
sells the unit,
Yeah.
then you would, you know,
That's what the owners that were next door and the owners next door to them wanted the board to do, is to go in there as soon as possible and take it over. But then the board, being very, very not progressive, was afraid that maybe they were going into something that they had no business going into. And then they would inherit the cost. So this was all fear-driven. Then the person next door, they sold their house and moved to the deceased. But the people after, third unit over, they felt that they could at least ask the board, when the insurance company comes in to look at the damage, that were they affected by any mold? Would they have the right to check and say, check our walls also, because we might be in danger of this mold growth? That's why I want to know how fast it would go.
yeah, like Fred said, if it's a warm unit, it'll breathe faster. If it's very cold, it's not, it's not going to, right? That's why I understand.
Correct, yeah. The mold doesn't grow in winter, in cold climate.
And I know there's some concern, like if it's in between the bank taking over and the old unit being there, then I guess there's a fine line, but as a board, you have to protect the residents of your building.
They didn't act.
I mean, Tom, am I not correct? Like, especially if it's the bank, if you know the bank owns that unit and you just can't get a hold of anyone, me as a manager, I would talk to the board and say, if you want a legal opinion, get the attorney to write a letter or draft something, but you have the right to get into that unit to protect the residents.
And for the protection of the other residents.
Exactly, and I would take pictures or videos and document it, and document all of the work, make sure your contractor writes down what they saw, have that removed. It's not that you have to replace the drywall right away or replace anything else in there, but at least get rid of the wet items and get that unit dry, and then later you can deal with the other issues, but to at least make it a safe environment for everyone else, for the neighbors nearby. I think that's crucial.
Our big thing when we go into a property is, in situations like that, is stabilizing it. For lack of a better analogy, the ambulance that pulls up to an accident, not the plastic surgeon that comes in after the fact. Very rough, but we're stabilizing the conditions, we're removing excess water, we're removing building material that is wet that we know we can't dry. Obviously, if it's environmental issues, things that are discolored, things like that, getting that stuff out of there. The occurrence I'm actually referencing, which sounded very similar, the 26 breaks in a townhouse because of the heat going off and it freezing, and it was a very slow process of finding. You turn on, you find as many as you can, you turn the water off. You fix those, you turn it back on, and then you look for more. And you turn it, it was a multi-day project just to chase all the breaks. But where I'm going with it is a very similar scenario where the association felt they had zero liability, zero responsibility in anything, and it was starting to affect a neighboring unit. And that neighboring unit is the person that really started the ball going with that management company to step in and be like, hey, something has to be done because of what's going on next door to me. And they ended up filing a claim. The association filed a claim. The association's insurance picked up, the mitigation up to primer, if you would. But there were certain things within that policy that the floors, the finished floors, were not responsibility of the association. So the association's insurance is like, well, I'm not paying to remove that wet carpet and that saturated wet floor, wood floor. The owner is. Well, the owner is, he's ditched out, he's gone, he's foreclosed, the bank has been sitting there. It was the bank's responsibility. So it became a very complicated process. To touch back to your mold thing, explore, for those people's own sake and knowledge, a human eye cannot detect mold. You can detect microbial growth. You don't know if it's mold or if it's mildew or one of the other 10,000 in that genome or gene. Wishing I remembered more of my biology college days, but you actually physically have to have it tested. There was it was kind of funny, but there was a special report done in, I want to say Wisconsin, or it was another state where, like an I-team type thing, went in and they put black nail polish and black shoe polish in a basement around the perimeter, and then called in a handful of restoration companies to say, hey, the concerned mom, hey, I think I have mold growth. And the majority of the restoration companies sadly said, oh my gosh, you do. I'm going to have to tear all of this out. This all has to be removed. It all has to be replaced. And I think only 2 out of like the 6 companies came in and said, you know, my experience, I can't tell you. I can't determine. You need to call out an industrial hygienist. Something we don't do is a conflict of interest. It's actually then someone comes out, takes tape sample lifts, takes air tests, sends them to a laboratory, they grow them in a petri dish, and then they determine what you're actually dealing with. And that is the proper protocol for mold remediation.
So you don't, you just stabilize it and then it would move on to another company who would do the mold, right?
No, we do the mold remediation.
Oh.
We do the cleanup.
Or the cleanup?
The evaluation.
Oh, but the evaluation.
The physical testing.
I got it.
Common practice is if it's discolored, regardless if it comes back as mildew or whatever species of mold, it needs to be removed and replaced. You can't dry it, you can't clean it. Any type of organic growth like that, whatever it is, has roots. It actually goes into the surface. So you wipe it off the surface, people think, oh, use bleach, use peroxide. You're removing it from the top, but it still goes in, it'll come back. So when you get into situations like that, when you walk in, like you walk into that foreclosed unit, everything's black, everything's discolored, you're treating it like it tested positive for mold, regardless of if it's tested or not. But I'm saying those unit owners that are next door to them may want to explore having actual testing done.
The testing, okay. Thank you.
Don't you know anything about the insurance, Dan? Workman's comp insurance particularly, how important it is?
Yeah, so we always recommend, even if you do not have any true employees, to carry a, if any, workers' compensation policy. And the reason we recommend that is, in the state of Illinois, if you've contracted somebody who's doing work on your behalf, so you're paying them, and they cannot provide workers' compensation in the event of an injury, you become the employer of record. So it's kind of convoluted, but basically it could happen in the sense where a contractor provides you with a certificate showing they have workers' compensation, but then they don't pay their bill. So then guy comes out, he's mowing, he's mowing the grass, runs his foot over. They don't have workers' compensation insurance. You've now become their employee and are responsible for their medical bills and any other various rehab they may have. So there's a policy that's $654, and it's meant to protect just that case. So it's an if any, it's to protect against uninsured subcontractors. So the state goes ahead and says those are now your employees in that case, and they pay for it.
Can I add something to that?
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Let's say you're having a roof redone and you contract with you, and you subcontract it to somebody else. Somebody else falls off the roof. Guess who's at fault?
Well, there's a liability that can be traced back to you, yeah, because you were the owner of the project.
Yep.
So what you want to make sure is that the roofing contractor that you employed provides you a certificate of insurance naming the association as an additional insured,
right,
that they have workers' compensation, that they have auto liability. So if they happen to run their van into your building, that they have auto liability, and that you're named as an additional insured on that policy as well. And then obviously workers' compensation.
That's why we send it to the attorney, and she puts all those attachments out.
Absolutely. That's the right way to do it. And then you hope, and I don't know if your attorney puts it, that anybody that they hire as well would follow that same kind of chain of additional insured language.
We have an entire compliance department here at J.C. Restoration for things like that. That's all they handle day in and day out. There's COI, certificate of insurances, to provide to our potential clients. For you to reach out to us, whether it be you as the manager, you as the board member, you as association, if you would, as a whole, self-managed association is where I was going with that, to request a certificate of insurance from us to have on file in your filing cabinet that does list you and whatever other entities are part of your association as additional insured language on our COI. That's what we provide, so that if and when you do need to call us that Sunday at 2 o'clock in the morning you at least know that that does exist.
When it comes to evaluate risk, potential risk in the future, does the insurance ask the board, or did the board should ask the insurance from past experience to see if they should have, say, not ABC, but also DF, clauses to incorporate in for future, say, disasters?
Unfortunately, they tend to stay out of that. And I think it's truthfully probably a liability reason that they choose not to. I mean, they would say it's recommended to have an evacuation plan, but then yet they won't provide you one. But us as your insurance broker can help you put one together through our third-party channels. We can get one forwarded to you. And obviously those should always be reviewed by the attorneys as well.
The reason I'm asking you is that we are next to wetlands, and there was flooding. We have three sub-associations and a master association. But I find that sometimes people don't want to really be proactive and have vision. They ask, my wife has heard that many times, Helen Keller, who was both, blind and deaf, what is worse than being blind? And she says having eyesight and lacking vision. So when it comes to this kind of situation, I mean, in terms of being proactive and taking certain steps that perhaps we pay some money now, but we'll be able to cover a big liability in the future, would the insurance help out the board to make a decision, or they have, it's a fine line they have to walk on?
It's definitely a fine line that they have to walk on. I think what you're going to find on that, though, is definitely more leaning on your manager and leaning on your insurance broker for that type of service. I don't think you're going to get much in terms of proactive guidance, techniques from the carrier, but that's what we're here for. I mean,
Could you explain the loss report and how often it comes out? And on that loss report, do the board members get a chance to see that if they request the agent or a homeowner?
The people that can request loss runs are by I don't even know who dictates it, but the property manager or anybody on the board. And you can ask for it any day that you want one.
And now that shows the items on the property that need to be improved, or what could be a potential liability, right?
No, a loss report is a snapshot of your claim activity. A loss control recommendations are provided by the carrier. So what you want is a loss control rec. So those are run basically every year. Some carriers do it every 2 years, but most all carriers do it after they write a new piece of business. So yeah, the same thing. I would assume that you could get a copy of that if you just ask the manager or the agent. So we get them. The process for us is you write a piece of business. The carrier typically goes out 30 to 60 days after, within that time frame. Give it 2 weeks. They'll send a loss control recommendation. We provide that to the manager, and then we kind of go back and forth of which ones are realistic, which ones aren't. Sometimes it's like put in a sprinkler system.
Right.
That's not happening.
Yeah.
And then we kind of just see to the city code a lot too. They're in compliance with the code. Do we go back and forth on grilling? And then sometimes you see crazy ones where like there's a stair missing. It's like, okay, well, they should address that ASAP.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Do all insurance companies do this?
Yeah, almost, I'd say 98% of them inspect after every they want to know basically the condition of the building if they've been on it for a number of years. So they're going to go see it probably once every 2 to 3 years. But every carrier will basically inspect after they write a new piece of business. So if you move carriers, they're going to go out there at some point. Because what they do, I mean, the underwriting process from placing a new piece of business is more or less a conversation between an insurance agent and an insurance underwriter. And they like to validate the facts after the fact, right? So we let them know that the building is 10,000 square feet, it has 10 units. They might go out there and somebody put that information in and it's 20,000 square feet with 20 units. So they just like to validate that the information provided is accurate.
So if you're just renewing with the same carrier, they don't necessarily do this? Because
every couple of years they should, and I would think that they do.
If we ask for the recommendation report, will it have on there when the last time?
Absolutely, yeah. It'll be dated. So yeah, I would be surprised if it isn't every couple of years. Most carriers. Who are you with from a carrier basis?
Farmers.
Farmers, yeah, farmers inspects a good amount, so they probably don't think your charcoal grows either. I would think.
Any wrap-up comments?
I don't think we have trouble.
No, I appreciate everybody coming out and great discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, everybody get home safe. Thank you.